Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto went to Demon Slayer universe. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. To the layman, he was performing a miracle, an act of the gods. But to those adept in the practice of medical ninjutsu, the act of healing an injury was down to a specific science. His chakra, refined and controlled, acted as a catalyst, stimulating the cells of the body, forcing their rate of division to increase exponentially. A wound that would take weeks of cell division to repair, when guided by him, could be healed in a matter of minutes. However, he also had to be cautious. He had to monitor and adjust the rate of division, lest the human cells run rampant and trigger the formation of cancer cells, further exacerbating the issue. Some time passed before Naruto halted the flow of chakra. Sweat slid down his face, his features paler than usual. Inspecting her wound, he concluded she was no longer at death's door. Not completely healed, but close enough. He patched her wound with the bandages at hand, before looking to her leg. Sadly, it was too damaged for him to do anything, with sections of calf outright missing, bitten off by the demon that attacked her. It would need to be amputated, hence the surgical saw his clone had retrieved. But that could wait. He turned his attention to the son, who Yuichiro had finished prepping. Naruto washed his hands once more before getting to work. The boy's injuries were different. His plight comprised of deep lacerations, running from his chest to abdomen, 5 marks shaped like claws. "Get the sutures ready," he instructed Yuichiro. The black-haired teen nodded. He gathered the sterile material and kept them at the ready. Across from Naruto, Yuichiro watched the process with wide, attentive eyes. The abilities his sensei possessed never ceased to amaze him. It was always fascinating, and the sheer focus it took was even more amazing. Normally, Naruto was playful, mischievous, and somewhat clumsy. Hell, on a normal day, he forgot the location of most of their medical supplies. But that side of him always seemed to disappear when faced with situations like this. Yuichiro glanced at his missing left arm. Just as he was helping these children, Naruto had done the same to him almost 3 years ago. Naruto healed the deeper layers of the boy's cuts, before closing them with the sutures. He worked swiftly and efficiently, approximating all 5 lacerations with steady hands and masterful fingers. The boy, unconscious, showed little protest. Finally finished, he let loose a breath. Even after years of doing this, he still felt nervous. No matter how many people he operated on, the weight of knowing he held the life of another person in his hands was still heavy and humbling. Inspecting his work, Naruto's gaze grew distant, wistful. Tsunade would have done this in half the time. "You okay?" Yuichiro inquired. Naruto seemed a bit pale, eyes glazed. He grinned, brushing off the concern. "Of course, Yui. Why wouldn't I be?" The teen shrugged. "I don't know. You just seem tired." "Well, it is dawn," he replied. Glancing outside, he watched as the sun rose, streaming through open windows. Yuichiro brushed a strand of hair from his face. He really needed a haircut. "What took you so long, anyway? I thought your trip was only supposed to take a day." "You know how these things are," Naruto replied. He washed his hands for the 3rd time, then made his way to the girl, still unconscious, still breathing. Her father watched closely. He was relieved, noticing that his children were now in stable condition. It was a small town, overrun with illness. "After treating as many people as I could, I decided to stick around and help investigate the cause of the plague." "And the woman?" Yuichiro asked, eyes narrowing. Naruto half smiled. "We'll talk about it later. Because one more thing remained, amputating this poor child's leg." Naruto frowned deeply. Yuichiro fared worse, a deep sadness crossing his features. Because, just like this girl, he had lost a part of himself to those wretched demons. "I'm sorry, Jiro," Naruto said gently, turning to face the man. "Your daughter's leg is too damaged for us to save. The only thing I can do now is remove it and prevent any infection. It's unfortunate, and I wish I could do more to help." Jiro, still remorseful, smiled a bit. Though his head spun and his skull pounded, he had been lucid enough to see that these two had saved his children's lives. Sure, Keiko would be devastated by the loss of her limb, but she would still live, she would still grow up alongside her brother. "That's okay, doctor," whispered the man. "I'm grateful to you for saving them." Yuichiro noticed the dazed look in Jiro's eyes. He quickly moved to the man's side and helped him into the empty bed. Blood still flowed from the cut on his temple, dripping down his cheek. "You have a concussion," Yuichiro explained. "I'm going to need you to lay down." The father didn't protest, even as Yuichiro began dressing his wound. Naruto, now ready to finish the remaining task, picked up the surgical saw. He grimaced, taking no pleasure in this final act. Under normal circumstances, it was far from a pleasant experience. But not with him. He would make sure she barely felt a thing. He gently applied a local anesthetic, something to help numb the most affected area. Running wind chakra down the blade, Naruto separated her lower leg from the rest of her body in a fraction of a second, giving her brain little time to even register the pain. It was a clean separation, with minimal damage to surrounding nerves and tissue. Then, not a second later, he began the healing process once again, ligating major blood vessels and nerves with chakra, before finally suturing her amputated leg. "She's a demon, isn't she?" "Yeah." Yuichiro made a face. "But why? Why is she here, in the clinic?" Naruto crossed his arms, seated at his desk. He'd been writing a report concerning the event that just occurred. Documentation, how he hated it. Though he ran a private practice, he was still beholden to some rules and regulations. Because she has no other place to go. She's a demon. Since when have we ever cared about whether they had shelter or a place to stay? Since today, Naruto replied. He stopped what he was doing to give his student the utmost attention. "They're fleas-hungry monsters who kill without remorse," Yuichiro continued, clenching his single fist. "What about what happened today? How do we know it wasn't that demon that caused this mess?" Naruto shook his head. "She was with me the whole time. She's not responsible for what happened." The younger teen's eyes burned with frustration. "But she's still a demon, and her kind is the cause of so much suffering. Just look at what they did to me. Because of those monsters, I've not only lost my arm, but also my brother." Michiro, he thought sadly. He hadn't seen his younger twin in years. It doesn't matter if she's not directly responsible. Being a demon, she's just as evil as the one who hurt Jiro's family. Naruto regarded him patiently, letting him finish. He understood. Yuichiro was angry, and rightfully so. But his words were still far from rational. Just because she's a demon, she's somehow just as evil. Naruto said, repeating the teen's words. "Would you say the same about Tamayo? About Yashiro?" Yuichiro stiffened. "No, but they're different." Naruto finished for him. "They're the good demons." Naruto stood from his chair and placed a hand on Yuichiro's shoulder. "Look. I get it. Demons kill the innocent every day. Most of them deserve a horrible, painful death, right? They're the worst of the worst, the lowest form of life. But, have you ever stopped to think that many demons were turned against their will? Have you ever considered that even innocent children are turned into demons?" The teen was silent, fist clenched. I know, he repeated softly. He tousled his subordinate's lengthy locks. "The world isn't black and white, Yuichiro. There are grays and areas of uncertainty. Don't forget that." Naruto leaned against his desk, orange tie worn loosely around his neck. "Her name is Susumaru, by the way. She attacked me on my way back into the city. He frowned. She attacked you? Naruto chuckled. Yeah. You should have seen it. So sure of herself. Controlled by her demonic urges. He crossed his arms. I shattered that confidence in a second. I was going to leave her in the sun to die, like I'd done so many times before. But then, after talking to her, she cried. Actually cried. I've killed a fair amount of demons. But, something about her made me decide to take a different course of action. Yuichiro heaved a tangible sigh, calming himself. I just hope you know what you're doing. When do I never, he replied, to which Yuichiro gave him an incredulous look. I'll watch her like a hawk, okay? And if she makes a move too close for comfort, I'll make sure she never gets another chance. I don't like it, said Yuichiro. But I'll trust you, sensei. Naruto groaned. Enough with the sensei already. Makes me feel old. Technically, he was still a teenager, just like Yuichiro. The younger teen cracked a smile before leaving Naruto's office. I'll be out here with the patients, sensei. The young shinobi/doctor rolled his eyes, then continued documenting. Later. He found her sitting in darkness. Susumaru was in the corner of the empty room, legs pulled into her chest. A single lamp was on, casting a dull glow upon her features. She was very pretty, he noted. Though a demon, she possessed the face of an angel. Sharp, symmetrical features and clear, unblemished skin. Her hair was just as striking, shoulder-length, obsidian locks that ended in an orange tint. Her eyes, slit like a cat's, shined as brightly as molten gold. Her clothes were still torn asunder, exposing some of her more feminine characteristics. She still held the suit jacket he'd given her, wrapping it around her body. She looked up the moment he arrived, a small book in his hand. Naruto, she whispered. Yo, he greeted, strolling to where she sat. This place is a bit empty. If you're going to be staying here, I might as well add some furniture. Maybe a bed? Some pictures. Oh, some books, too. Or even a... Wait, Susumaru interrupted. Naruto paused and rose a curious brow. What's the matter? I'm not sure if this is a good idea. What isn't? This, me, being here, she explained. He tilted his head. Why is that a bad thing? Because I'm a demon, she exclaimed, before quickly lowering her voice. You're a doctor. You help people. You save people. But all I've ever done is kill them. Naruto regarded her from afar, her saddened features, her glistening amber orbs. Then he moved closer, sitting down in front her. He gave her all his attention, a gesture that surprised her. I thought that your blood was everything I would need. But now, I'm not so sure anymore, Susumaru explained. You saw it. The moment we arrived at the clinic, I could hardly control myself. The scent of that much blood triggered something in me. But you didn't attack anyone though, Naruto said, looking her in the eyes. You resisted the urge to do so, despite so much fresh blood being in the air. That's only because you were there, she deflected. Naruto smiled gently. Don't sell yourself so short, Susumaru. I know for sure it wasn't just because of me that you restrained yourself. She hugged her knees tightly, gazing downward. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Why don't you? Naruto inquired, probing deeper into her thoughts. Though she was decades older than him, she acted much younger. Because I've murdered people, Naruto. Innocent people. She looked broken, eyes glistening. Even my family. I killed them. Then you must strive to atone for your sins all the more, he encouraged. You're still alive. You still have time. Your empathy and compassion for humans is returning. You're a demon, sure. But you can be so much more. Will this really be okay? She asked. What if I attack someone? You won't, Naruto replied. I said it earlier, didn't I? I'm here to stop you if you do. And as you know all too well, there's no way you can beat me, he teased lightly. She laughed a bit, gaze rising to meet his. Okay. He smiled. Also, there's someone I want you to meet. I'll take you to see her in a few days. She's a doctor just like me. But she reminds me of you, in a way. In what way? She asked. And Naruto's smile widened into a grin. Oh, it's a surprise. The sun had set hours ago, and she was outside, tending to the garden. Naruto's clinic was a modest one, not too big, not too small. His front yard, however, was quite expansive. It extended many meters, decorated with elegant flowers, winsome shrubs, and cascading fountains. He spared no expenses, transforming this area into a calm, serene location. His home could be found at the furthest reaches of town, somewhere secluded, yet still easily accessible to those in need. A full moon glinted from above, bathing the world in silver light. The center pond was especially beautiful, reflecting the celestial body that stretched across the sky. A dozen koi swam about. They circled the clear waters, aesthetically colored. Then they drew near, noticing her presence. They were hungry, it seemed. So, she reached into her bag of feed, then gently tossed handfuls their way. Susumaru watched with starry eyes as the fish began to eat, blissfully unaware of the world outside their tiny home. As long as they were well fed, nothing else mattered. She moved on to another section of the garden. Wielding a pair of shears, she shaped the shrubs to the best of her ability. She focused intently, squinting as her arms glided across sections of overgrown leaves. She sliced and cut, moved back to inspect, then sliced and cut some more. She continued this for some time, all too aware of Naruto's watchful gaze. The blonde doctor was a distance away, seated on a wooden bench. As a demon, her eyesight was superb, and she could see him clearly. Naruto had a sketch pad, with a brush and ink. Upon a sheet of paper, he crafted intricate symbols that seemed like a different language. Though cheerful most of the time, he still looked sad. At certain moments, she would see him looking off into the distance, regret in his sea-blue gaze. For someone that helped so many, it seemed as though nothing could dull the pain in his fragile heart. Naruto noticed her staring, and she quickly got back to work. For some reason, Susumaru loved this. Long ago, she used to help her mother in their garden. She had forgotten those times, only recently remembering. She had been the youngest of three, an annoying, brash, and adventurous child that never listened to her parents. She hadn't been poor, nor had she been rich. They had a roof over their heads and food to eat. In that time, their country had begun opening its borders to the Western world, ending a 2-century-long isolationist policy. After that, advancements quickly spread to Japan, and she'd been too caught up in all the wonder to listen to her parents. She'd been rebellious, a careless child that wanted to leave the old ways behind. She began going against the wishes of her family, going to places she wasn't supposed to go. And one night, against the wishes of her father, she left despite their warnings, and it cost Susumaru her humanity and the lives of those dearest to her. She clenched her fists. I'll atone for it all, Susumaru promised. And maybe someday, I might see you again, Mom, Dad. If only for a moment. To say, I'm sorry. Vigor renewed, she continued her work in the garden. It had to be perfect. Naruto had given her a second chance, an opportunity to do some good. Making sure this place was well kept was the least she could do for him. So she worked and worked until every area of the garden was touched on. Susumaru looked to him once more. Still lounging on a bench, a black cat sat on his lap, purring with delight as Naruto gently stroked its fur. She smirked, an idea coming to mind. Behind her back, she conjured a tamari ball. She gripped it tightly, locking eyes with him. Then she threw it, much faster than normal, but not enough to injure. Naruto didn't blink. He causally lifted his hand and caught her ball without an inkling of effort. He then rose from the bench, his cat protesting the sudden movement. He beamed the ball back at her, this time much faster. Her temari tore through the air like a meteor, whistling in the night. Without a thought, she braced herself and caught it, surprised by the amount of power behind his throw. She was pushed back several meters, feet skidding against the grass. She returned it back to him, doubling her speed. He still caught it with his bare hands, a competitive gleam in his eyes. Excitement fluttered in her stomach as she took a stance, readying herself for a superhuman game of catch. They began slowly, but things soon escalated, so much so, that her temari was only a blur. Each time she threw it, he would catch it, sometimes jumping dozens of meters into the sky, and launching it back just as quickly. This continued for a time, until she found herself giggling with delight, returning every toss that came her way. It reminded her so much of playing with her older sister. Something welled up within her, emotions she hadn't felt in decades, and she could not contain the innocent, childlike smile that stretched across her features. Eventually, their game came to an end. Naruto resumed his work, painting those symbols again. By now, the ground was littered with numerous pages of a strange, elegant language she could not discern. Naruto then called to her. She approached, sitting down beside the blonde doctor. Immediately, his cat moved to her side, snuggling against her orange kimono, which he had bought for her, replacing her old one. "Ha! Kimiko likes you." He looked genuinely surprised. "She normally runs away from anyone that isn't me or Yuichiro." "Well, I've always loved animals." Susumaru reached out to stroke Kimiko's black fur. "At least, I've just remembered that I do." Naruto tilted his head. "Your memories are still coming back." "Yeah." Susumaru nodded, looking to the sky. "It's kind of strange to see how much I've changed since becoming a demon. I mean, I'm still the same person, somehow. But I'd forgotten so much about myself that I might as well be someone else." "If you ask me," he said, "that doesn't matter. It's who you are going forward that matters." She remained silent, considering his words. In a way, he was right. But it was still hard not to think of all the terrible things she did over the past 30 years. "Hey," Susumaru began. She fidgeted, clasping her hands in front of her kimono. Thanks for that." "For what?" "For throwing this with me," she answered, summoning her temari. "You promised, and you kept that promise. I know it seems dumb, but it really means a lot to me." Naruto waved her off. "Don't worry about it. I needed to get up after sitting for so long, anyway." Susumaru glanced at the pages of calligraphy he had been creating. They almost looked like talismans, something a few demons were capable of producing. A type of blood demon art, they allowed demons to perform unique feats, simply by writing symbols on pieces of paper. She wanted to ask, but refrained from doing so, turning to the clinic. Yuichiro had just opened the door. He held a bag and a box of medical supplies. His hair was much shorter now, and the turquoise tint that defined his obsidian curls were much more pronounced. Despite his missing arm, he moved with confidence, approaching both of them. "I'm heading out," the teen said. "I changed both of the kids' bandages before they went to bed, and I restocked all the supplies." "Thanks, Yui." Naruto reached out to tousle the shorter teen's hair. "What would I ever do without you?" Yuichiro protested, glaring as Naruto finally removed his hand. "You'd be perfectly fine without me. You're just too lazy to do all the work on your own." Naruto gave a sheepish smile, crossing his arms. "You know, I wouldn't mind if you stayed over for a few more days." "I know you wouldn't," he answered. "But I'll be fine. There haven't been any more attacks since that day. Plus, I'll be in a well-lit, crowded street." "Fine," Naruto said, conceding. "See you tomorrow, then." Yuichiro smiled a bit, a rare sight to behold. Later, sensei. Before leaving, he briefly looked at Susumaru, barely acknowledging her presence as he began walking through the garden and toward the exit. I get the feeling that he doesn't like me, she remarked bluntly, stating the obvious. Naruto continued writing. Don't worry about him. It takes a while for him to warm up to people. You'll see. He's very kind once you get to know him. A demon did that to his arm, she ventured. Naruto did not deny this fact, nodding. Then I don't blame him for feeling uncomfortable around me. You're sure he'll be safe going out tonight? I wouldn't be too worried. He grinned. I have a clone following him right now, just in case. A clone? She looked confused, wondering what he was talking about. Anyway, I have a question, Naruto said, changing the subject. She turned to him, curious. Do you know who was responsible for attacking all those people? Susumaru stiffened. The aura of the crime scene returned to her, filling her mind with dread. She didn't know exactly who it was, but it had smelt heavily of Muzan's blood. I don't know specifically, she said quietly. But I think it was a member of the 12 Kazuki. Yes, she knew. She knew that she wasn't a member of the 12. The realization struck a few days ago, after hours of deliberation. As her memories returned, she remembered the demon that turned her. Not Muzan, as she'd once believed, but someone else. She recalled the number that had been etched into his eye, a distinct number 2. An upper moon, to be exact. She had not seen him since that day, and the more she thought about it, the more its sense made. The numbers corresponded with their rank. And after looking in the mirror and finding no such number, the truth became clear. What a fool she was. For years, she had been at his beck and call, actually believing she was important to Muzan. But he'd just been using her. She'd just been a tool to him. 12 Kazuki. Naruto was certain he had heard that name. Tamayo must have mentioned them before. They're important, aren't they? Very, Susumaru answered. They're the 12 most powerful demons. They serve directly under him. She did not mention Muzan's name, and Naruto understood why. The curse. Another thing Tamayo had explained to him. Naruto had never encountered that man, nor did he desire to. He had other matters to attend to, more important things at hand. Besides, the Demon Slayer Corps was already on the job. This was their fight, not his. He wasn't allied with them in any way, and he had only met a handful of them. But based on the few he'd interacted with, they seemed to be highly capable warriors. The image of a water-themed slayer flashed before his eyes. Naruto shook the thought from his mind. He had other responsibilities. He had to return home. He had to save his world from the tyranny of his best friend. While he was deep in thought, Susumaru glanced at him once more, eyes roaming his features, straying far lower than they should have. Naruto was wearing a loose-fitting shirt. Unbuttoned at the collar, it exposed his neck and some of his muscled chest. Even beneath such comfortable clothes, his defined body was difficult to ignore. And the scent of his blood was even harder to resist. It had been some time since she first consumed his blood, since her moment of weakness upon entering his clinic that day. But the more time she spent with him, the more her desire for other humans waned. He seemed to notice, because he turned her. You've gone a while without blood, haven't you? Naruto said casually. Here. He leaned closer, rolling up his sleeve. She hesitated, a quiver running through her. As much as she liked to believe she had changed, she was still a demon, still beholden to certain biological instincts. Are you sure? It's been 2 days, and you haven't done anything to make me believe you were lying when you agreed to my conditions. He smiled gently. Go on. I don't mind. Okay. Susumaru scooted closer, the cat at her side scurrying away. Her fangs lengthened, his scent filling her senses. He lifted his forearm to her, and she sank her teeth into his flesh. A tremor racked her body, her very being. His temperate blood filled her mouth, rushing like an endless river. She drank slowly and with a purpose, face flushing, eyes closing. She savored his taste, savored the pleasant feeling that came with this act, the warmth that spread to every portion of her body. It lasted only a few moments, but to her, it felt like an eternity. His blood wasn't like Muzan's. It wasn't harsh, nor did it force its will upon her. It almost felt kind. Finally, she pulled away. Like that day, there was no disgust in his eyes. No judgment at all. Even then, she could see the wound she'd given him begin to heal. Not as fast as a demon, but still impressive, nonetheless. Naruma, Tokyo. Ozaki yawned, stretching her arms to the night sky. Her crow squawked incessantly upon her shoulder, and she reached down to scratch its adorable little head. Though the moon glinted from above, the lamps in the city streets seemed even brighter. Being from the countryside, the city always amazed her. The buildings were taller, made of concrete and brick. The people were also different, walking about with both traditional and modern attire. She looked around with wide eyes, taking in everything she could. It wasn't often that she was called upon for missions in Tokyo. Most of her assignments involved incidents outside metropolitan areas. So, whenever she found herself here, she took the time to experience as much as she could before returning to headquarters. "Does your crow ever shut up?" Murata asked, rubbing his temples. The taller demon slayer walked beside her. Along with their standard uniform, he wore a black haori, his Nichiren blade hidden away. Ozaki's mood fell, once again reminded that he was with her. She had been so lost in the scenery that she forgot they were both assigned to this mission. She didn't hate Murata, not really. He seemed like a decent guy, as well as a fine demon slayer. But she preferred working on cases alone. They barely knew each other, too. Outside of formal meetings with the higher-ups, she hardly ever spoke to him. "He's just excited to see me, that's all," Ozaki explained. She brushed strands of onyx hair from her face, frowning. Ever since childhood, her hair had always been a bother. No matter what she did, it always looked messy, with stray locks sticking out in random places. "Alright, Sora. You can go now. We got the message." As if understanding her words, the crow took off into the sky, squawking loudly. Ozaki stifled a laugh, reminded of how much she loved that little bird. Her crow had arrived to inform them of an upcoming gathering of demon slayers ranked Kano and above. "What's the plan now?" Murata asked. After investigating for hours, they decided to take a break. They stopped by one of the food stands still open and ordered 2 bowls of ramen. Slurping the delicious noodles, Ozaki paused to think. "Before deciding on anything, let's review what we know." She placed her bowl on the table. "First, we know that for the past year, demon attacks in Naruma have been disproportionately low, at least, compared to other parts of Tokyo." "I wonder why that is," said Murata, taking a bite. "I mean, in a crowded city like Tokyo, it's strange to think there is a place where demon activity is so far removed from other areas. Of course, most demons attack isolated villages, but nearly 0 attacks in a span of 12 months? That's completely unheard of." Ozaki nodded. "Exactly. Even more interesting is that, in just the past few days, demon activity has spiked significantly. And most of the victims were male, some of whom are still missing," Murata added, thinking. "This attack has me concerned, Ozaki. From what witnesses told me, multiple people died in one night. Normally, demons pick off 1 or 2 targets at once. But this attack involved 10 people." He closed his eyes, then sighed. "This might take longer than we thought." "In that case," Ozaki began, finishing her bowl, "since we'll be here for a while, let's get a place to stay." Murata rubbed his hair, blushing. "You mean, both of us?" She shrugged and grabbed her sword. "Why not? We'll look around for a few more hours before calling it a night." She paid for their meal, smirking. Just don't think of doing anything while I sleep, or you'll get a sword through the eye. Murata shuddered at the thought. Though cute and seemingly delicate, Ozaki was no pushover. They were the same rank, after all. Wouldn't dream of it. Picking up his things, Murata moved to her side, and they continued their investigation for a little while longer. The next day, Yuichiro made sure he arrived on time. He had stayed up much later than usual, having been invited to a little tea together with his neighbors. Admittedly, it wasn't his brightest idea to stay so long, but he still had fun. For the longest time, Naruto had encouraged him to make friends with other people his age. I won't be here forever, Yuichiro, Naruto had said. Begrudgingly, he accepted the suggestion, and slowly but surely, he started coming out of his shell. During his first year with Naruto, Yuichiro had been glued to him, following him around, ever willing to repay him for saving his life. But Naruto desired nothing in return. The thought of such kindness always made him feel guilty. Naruto was the older brother he never had. Before Yuichiro met him, it had been just him and his younger twin. Both of their parents had died before they turned 11, leaving them to fend for themselves. Yuichiro frowned. He had been so cruel to Michiro, the opposite of what Naruto was to him. And of all the regrets he had in this world, it was the possibility of never getting to see his brother again, of never apologizing for being so cold and heartless, that left him in a state of sadness. He began the day by opening the curtains, allowing golden rays of light to fill the clinic. He then went to check Naruto's 3 patients. They had been here for over 2 days, steadily recovering from their injuries. Entering the room, he was greeted by the sight of Jiro, watching over his children. The man no longer had a bandage on his head, and his concussion was a thing of the past, courtesy of Naruto's healing abilities. His children were also awake, chatting with their father. They were still wrapped in bandages, but the speed at which they had recovered was astonishing. Once at death's door, both of them almost seemed ready to be discharged. Jiro smiled once he approached. "Ah, Yuichiro. Good morning." "Good morning, Jiro. I trust your night was fine." "Yes," he replied, glancing at his children. "They slept well, without a care in the world." "I'm glad," Yuichiro replied. One of the kids waved to him, which he kindly returned. "Based on their condition, I think they might be set to leave in a few days." Jiro nodded. "It's almost hard to believe." He smiled softly. "I don't have the words to express my gratitude. You and the doctor have done so much for me and my family. Even if I sold everything I owned, it would never be enough to repay you." "There's no need for any of that," Yuichiro assured, lips twitching upward. "We don't do this for attention, or even praise." I know, said the man. He paused, adding, "Even though my wife is gone, even though the world seems a bit darker, I'm still grateful for meeting you too." "I'm grateful for meeting you too, Jiro." It was Naruto. He entered the room with his usually smile, a stethoscope around his neck. The kids grew excited once they saw him, despite the tired look in his eyes. "After all," he continued, "your cooking is way better than mine. I really enjoyed the meal you made the other day. It's the least I could do." Jiro laughed a bit. "And hey, I still want you to come to my restaurant someday. I'll make you the largest bowl of ramen in the world, for free." Naruto chuckled. "I'd like that, Jiro," he said, greeting each child with a fist bump. "Hey, Keiko. Hey, Kuro. You guys seem lively today. Anything exciting happen?" "Oha." Kuro, the younger brother, beamed. "Me and my sister just decided." Naruto arched a brow. "Decided what?" "We decided that we want to be doctors when we grow up," Keiko explained, eyes bright. "Just like you." "Really?" he asked, playfully unconvinced. "Are you sure? It's going to be a lot of hard work, you know." "Yeah, we know," Keiko assured. But we want to help people, like you and Yuichiro do. Naruto glanced at his student, who looked on with amusement. Well, then, he said. I won't stop you too. In fact, I'm rooting for you. See, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but somehow, I still managed to learn. I'm sure both of you will be fine doctors. He ruffled each child's hair, then proceeded with his assessment. He checked their lungs and heart with his stethoscope. He then moved on to assess their skin and injuries, discreetly healing whatever wounds remained with a pulse of chakra. They were practically ready to be discharged, but he wanted Keiko to stay a bit longer, so she could grow more accustomed to using crutches and her prosthetic limb. Stepping back for a bit, he watched them chat with Yuichiro. Naruto crossed his arms. He looked to Jiro, looked to the two children already laughing and giggling after such a tragedy. They didn't deserve to suffer such a thing. They had lost their mother, their home, and many others had died in this event. Naruto sighed, a long, heavy sigh, as he moved to wash his hands. Normally, he didn't get involved. The demon slayers were capable of solving these types of issues. But this time, he planned to find the demon that started this whole fiasco, whether they were a member of the 12 Kazuki or not. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.